So I am really happy to be here tonight on the 29th of November. Can't quite believe it, with some of my absolute favorite people. So we will go for ladies first. In my top corner, we have got the lovely Brice from Esoteric Atlanta. Hi, Brice. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, 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 sort of. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then in the bottom corner here on my screen, we've got the lovely Medyhne from Australia. How are you doing, Medyhne? And from Arise Humanity, her YouTube channel.
Good. I got another puppy yesterday, so that helps.
That always helps. And we have got our honorary, very, very special man, Jean-Claude from Beyond Mystic #3. So you're doing well there. How are you doing, Jean-Claude?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invitation. Sorry about that. I was about to say that in French for some reason, but my mind wasn't quite ready for the English translation.
Well, twice in one night, so I'm very honoured, you see. Jean-Claude, twice in one night, and no innuendos there. So, so we're going to have a lovely round table. We're going to banish Brice from the camera because she's looking beautifully bronzed, and we're not. Although Medyhne, you're looking pretty bronzed as well. So we'll go to the makeup next time, Jean-Claude. But we're going to have a lovely talk. We've got some really, really important topics to start with. So one of the first ones I'd like to really launch off with, and it's going to be a bit of a free-for-all, is one of the things that you were talking about, Medyhne, which is staying in this 0 point neutrality. Can we kick off with you, Medyhne, just to sort of start introducing that topic, what we actually mean by that, and then we can have a discussions about how we can all help ourselves to stay there.
Sure. Well, I think this is a really important thing to focus on at the minute. So clearly, with everything happening in the world, you know, you can be emotionally on a real roller coaster where you're up and you're down and you're all over the place. So the point of being in 0 point neutrality is that that is the point from which we can reset a new reality. We can reset a new paradigm when we're in that 0 point, and we can create that by being, you know, in that neutral state. And when you are constantly in the cycle of getting caught up emotionally in everything, you're actually self-perpetuating that whole cycle. And so when we're wanting to step out of the 3D reality, you know, the denseness of this 3D reality, we want to be able to maintain a level of neutrality so that we can recreate a better reality, if that makes sense. And so therefore, getting caught up in, you know, anger and sadness and all those emotions, it's not going to serve yourself and it's not going to serve the collective. And also the other point with that is you're actually feeding the matrix. You know, they talk about the energy or louche that the dark get from, you know, all our negative emotions. And so you're feeding that through all your emotional reactions. So to learn skills and abilities to be able to stay centered in the midst of that, sort of in non-attachment, like an observer, all those sort of qualities are really, really important at the moment to practice. And this is actually a perfect training ground for being able to learn all those things. So think of it as an opportunity in some ways to really master things that are going to really accelerate the growth of ourselves individually and also collectively.
Wow, that's so true, and something that I really need to work on still. Constant work in progress for me. How are you seeing that play out, Jean-Claude, in your sort of current interactions with people around you?
Well, it's difficult, especially in the last 2 years, because we've been so polarized with everything, mainstream news, whether that's gender or our thoughts about what's going on in the world right now. To me, though, the 0 point, and Medyhne was making a point there about a reality, creating our reality. There was this guest speaker, well, you guys know him as Drumvalo Melchizedek. I remember seeing him like 20 years ago, and he was talking about how some of these really ancient tribes were using the 0 point energy of their heart to manifest. And what he was explaining is that for most of us, when we manifest, we think we want this, we think we want that, and we're up here in the headspace. And when we're doing that, even though we might have the right intention of manifesting something positive, because we're not in the heart space or in that 0 point, we are manifesting duality. So we are manifesting the positive thing we want to manifest, but unknowingly also manifesting the counterpart to it. And it eventually comes around and kicks us in the ass, or words to that effect anyways. That was the seminar he was teaching. And so the idea is to go down in the heart, in that 0 point, so that you manifest without that duality. And I think this is what Medyhne's pointing to, the fact that if we all get there, suddenly we can break out of this matrix of control that we're in now. But because the powers that be in the matrix know this, they are trying to divide us and conquer us right now. And we are being spread out, not in the heart, but into all of this fear programming. So it is very much a challenge now, maybe more than ever, to create from that 0 point. But it is also priority number one.
Oh, that's so, so true. I agree with everything you say there. Brice, you've just been away. You've had Thanksgiving over in America, which is always a wonderful, but can be challenging time when we're in sort of times like now, where people are perhaps interacting with loved ones that are in a very different place to themselves. What about you? How are you finding that this can be brought into action or is playing out in your reality?
Well, it's interesting. I just kept the second sutra of the Yoga Sutras is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So this means that yoga is controlling the mind chatter. So vritti is like throwing a pebble in a pond, skipping it, and the waves that go out, that's your thoughts. And Nirodha means void, or like a 0 point. It's funny, like in traditional yoga, you start off in samasthiti, which is the 0.0 position. And so a lot of this, and I had a teacher once up in Philadelphia before I started going to India, who would always get really, really excited when someone would come into the Mysore room that was like super tight, like a 60-year-old guy that was like super tight and overweight, because he was like, okay, yes, now we have work to do. Now we have something to work with. And so when you talk about this being a training ground, this is ultimately the training ground for that like mind control, in the sense that you can not just be like not aware of your emotions, you can just observe them, feel them, take action for them, like stand up for what's right, but also be able to kind of settle into it and have this like sense of non-attachment to the outcome of your action, if that makes sense. You know, that's why like in traditional yoga, understand like the way that yoga is taught in the West, it's about being comfortable, which is actually not true at all. In the Yoga Sutras, it's about being uncomfortable and pushing your body to the point where you feel like you're going to break. And then how that triggers your mind. It's like a controlled triggering to help you observe your own. You know, it's funny, in a lot of religions, I was just saying that they want to blame like the devils and the demons, but in yoga, it's like, no, it's you. It's your fault. Like you have to be accountable to your own thoughts and your own attachments, whether that's karmic, dharmic, whatever, and just observe them. It's kind of like the unsolvable riddle, because you can't always get away from that. But yes, when you are in, and I was just telling you, Catherine, before we signed on my normal day-to-day life, I'm pretty lucky because I'm around people who, like you guys, who are think the same pretty much as I do. We're on the same kind of wavelength. I don't watch TV, so I don't have the media in my ear the whole time. But then when you go away and you're with people, loved ones, family that aren't that way, you feel yourself getting triggered, and to like know how to navigate that and know how to like not like freak out and get pissy about everything. You know, we're not at the point where like family is not inviting us over, because like my family's pretty awake. They're pretty like, they're not getting, you know, but other than that, but other extended family members, you know, it is kind of hard, and you kind of want to like, you have to like bite your tongue. I don't know. It's hard to navigate, but that is the training ground. That is the practice. Like, how do you breathe through that? How do you allow, and also allow, there's this, and Janine talks about this. It's true in yoga too. You have to allow other people to live out their karma. You can't stand in the way of people making decisions that their soul needs to make in that way as well. You know, so it's the unsolvable riddle, as my teacher used to say, you know, like, I guess we'll see when we get to the end point. If all of our,
I like that point that you made there, Brice, about not being in reaction. So, you know, when you're reacting unconsciously and you're not thinking and you're not being mindful, then you can go into old patterns and create a whole lot of energy and reactions that you don't really want to bring into the world. So it really is about being consciously mindful at every moment, you know, as much as possible at the moment. And I know that's a big ask, but it's going to really help people to navigate their way through everything.
Can I just ask then, so it's very interesting perspectives as we go around the table on things, and so many, everything you know, we talk about 0-point neutrality and it's got a slightly different meaning for everyone. So for example, when I'm communicating with animals, the only way I can do it is when I'm from a heart space. So I've got to take my thinking head out of it completely and move completely into my heart and tune in from there. And that's a process I can now, because I've been doing it for so long, slip into really easily. But it's still a process that I'm slipping into that I will employ perhaps when I'm communicating consciously with animals or plants or even humans in a consult, but not necessarily employing in some aspects of my day-to-day life. But picking up on what you've just said, Medyhne, where I find it quite interesting is when you look at how animals are reacting very much from a heart space, not a head space, but they're also reacting very much on instinct and in the moment, which humans could perceive as from an emotional state. So for example, they're not overthinking things, they're just reacting in a true form to themselves as the situation presents itself, often from a survival mode. So how would that fit into this 0-point neutrality from your point of view?
Me?
Yeah, Medyhne, sorry, yeah.
Okay, that's all right. Well, I think that animals, because they're coming from the heart, that they're automatically coming from a better space anyway. You know, we in the Western culture, we're taught to be very cerebral and to live in that headspace all the time, which of course is that protective survival mechanism. And it's often very much based in fear, even though it's there to help us, it's trying to do the right thing, it's keeping us in that lower frequency. But if you're automatically coming from that heart space like animals are, you're going to automatically be in a better frequency as well when they react, you know, instinctively. So I would say they have so much to teach us in that respect.
Me too. And you, everyone here, we've all got dogs. So if we take an example for if a dog meets another dog or a human, say out on a walk, that it feels uncomfortable with, it will react. Now, depending on the personality of that rat, it might react in a fight, flight, or freeze response. But what's interesting with humans is there's so much social construct about how we're expected to react to certain situations. It takes us almost out of that authenticity, doesn't it, when we're actually coming into contact with another being or another opinion.
Oh, I've got a great point for this. So we're sort of taught to be like chameleons. So when we talk to somebody, we adapt to their energy and their personality and their behavior, and we change ourselves to adapt to them. So as a spiritual teacher, as a leader, as someone who's a way shower, you're maintaining, hopefully, you know, a higher frequency. And so you want to be able to maintain your own energy in the midst of interacting with everyone. You don't want to be dropping your energy down to match everyone else around you, because then you're actually dropping the, you know, the energy on the planet, and you're not really being a role model for others as a spiritual teacher by dropping your own frequency. So I think that that's an instinctive thing that we do in order to socialize and to be able to be approved and accepted in, you know, social situations. But I think it's really good to be mindful of holding your own frequency, even if it's not necessarily approved of or people don't understand it. You want to still be able to maintain that higher state of awareness in the midst of all consciousness, because that is what brings the planet into evolution and humanity.
And I think that's really important, because when animals doing it, they're doing it from a completely authentic place. So they're picking up that energy from whether it's another animal or a human around them and reacting authentically to it. But then they're not holding on to any emotions from it, because then they can let that go straight away and instantaneously, sort of thing, which is really amazing, which I think a lot of us humans can find it the letting go part quite hard.
Yeah, I think for the animals, like my dog, he can just shake it off, right? So it's like
Yeah.
within a second or two, it's shaken off. But not only that, they're not programmed the way we are programmed through our lifetimes, through the media, through schooling and all that. And so they get to observe the situation, the many facets of the situation, and sit in there in the dichotomy of what they're looking at. And Catherine, you and I were talking on the previous show here today on your channel about how some people are having a lot of difficulty right now following some of the truthers, because some of the truthers have diametrically opposed views to other truthers, and they're coming to you and me and like, Jean-Claude, Catherine, how could that be? How could that be? And they're kind of in a fear frequency or in that anger because things are not consolidating. And what you and I were trying to convey to them is that to go into that 0 point energy again is to be able to hold those two juxtaposed feelings, ideas, points of view for long enough for it to resolve. That's when you can hit that 0 point energy. And I'm reminded of that painting of the Marianne's for the French Revolution. We have this idea of the bare-breasted warrior. And for a lot of people, they're like, well, how can she be leading an army? She's at her vulnerable. She doesn't have her armor on and her breasts are out. Well, it's because she's holding those two feels in one that she's so powerful. She is at her most vulnerable, but at the same time, at her more powerful level as well. That creates that 0 point energy. And there, from there, magic really happens. But it's hard for humans to hold those two diverging ideas at the same time. And I think this is what we're all being called to practice now that we're moving into this age of Aquarius, where we become the knowledge bearer, as opposed to being schooled in the age of Pisces through all of these different programs. We now have to hold the information. And in order to do that, we have to hold information that sometimes it's not aligned with each other. That's the beauty of that 0 point. Again, very difficult concept, especially now because of all of the programming and the fear going on the planet, so that we don't reach that 0 point. Because when we do, it all has to do with Kundalini energy. Brice and I have talked about this on the show before. That's really the last gate to our freedom. If we can master this energy and create the world we want to create, as opposed to the one that the Matrix is duping us into creating, that's the end of the game, or that's the end of the line for that matrix of control. So this is why it's so critical at this point.
I have a fantastic technique to go with that, JC, where people can go in on an inner advisor meditation. So they go inward and they connect with what's called their inner advisor. And that is their sort of guide or their barometer to go forward in the world, as opposed to getting information that's out in the field that is, you know, so diametrically opposed a lot of the time. When we go inward and we get that universal knowledge from within, that is the knowledge that we really want to be connecting to at the minute. So that's also about the 0 point that you're talking about, JC. And I think that that's a helpful thing for people to practice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, perhaps we can do that at the end, Medyhne, if you're happy to, because I think it would be really lovely to give a practical example to people when we finish, because that's so important. Brice, you were saying, again, we were having a chat before about this duality in the spiritual space, which you've got some very good examples of to discuss, haven't you?
Oh, well, this has been my whole adult life has been this discussing this stuff. But you know, it's interesting, you're talking about the animals being able to shake it off, and our complexity of thought as human beings, which sometimes I think animals are far more superior than we are, but we have more complexity of understanding ideas than maybe they do. And I have a book, I can't remember the name of it. It's in my trunk in India. I don't know the next time I'm gonna be able to get to my trunk in India, but it was written by a therapist, and I cannot remember the name of it. And he compared like trauma-based responses, which a lot of people, whether they know it or not, are responding from trauma-based, whether that's from a small childhood thing or something major, or even something that's just in your DNA. They don't even realize that that's triggering something that would be considered like a wound. And I know for me, I was diagnosed with CPTSD a few years back, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I realized it because in one of my practices, I started to shake uncontrollably, like I could not control my body. And the person at the time who was teaching me said, you know, this happens to a lot of people when you can watch videos of these soldiers coming out of war, they start to shake uncontrollably. I think you need to go talk to a therapist. And so I went to I had an excellent trauma therapist. I know that people have weird ideas about psychologists now, and I get that, but this woman was really great. And she did EMDR therapy with me, that rapid eye movement therapy. But basically what happens is we as human beings, when we go through ABUSE or any type of like, especially when it's ongoing. For me, growing up, I had a lot of narcissism and within my guardians around me. And so that caused a lot of, for me to be very trying to always make things okay. And of course, trauma responses come from that as well. But anyway, I didn't even realize that that was happening until I had that experience, and that a lot of my interrelationships with people with and how I was responding with things was coming from wounds that I wasn't even aware of. And part of that observing is being able to like recognize that about yourself, not be upset about it, just as Ram Dass always says, look at it, be like, well, that's interesting, okay. But animals in the wild, this psychiatrist compared it to animals in the wild, and you have this fight, flight, or freeze response. And so like if you see a pack of impala or deer and they're being hunted, they'll run, and if they can't run, they'll freeze. And it's almost like playing possum, like their body will kind of freeze up. And so multiple things can happen. They're either going to be taken out, and if they are taken out, then they won't feel the pain as much because their nerves are frozen, or they'll be taken back to the lion's den or whatever and then left, and they can get up and run away later, or they'll be left there. Well, then they'll be able to stand up and they'll shake it out. Like the nerves will start shaking, and then they'll just go about their business. But as humans, when we go through that type of ABUSE, and especially when it's more mental or emotional, we tend to store that information within our nervous system, and we don't know how to express it, especially with children. I mean, children are like animals. My nieces and my nephew, if they don't like somebody, you can tell. Like if there's an adult around and they're not comfortable with that adult, they don't have the logical words to explain why, you can see it on their faces. And how many of us were forced to sit on someone's lap as a kid that we don't want to sit on their lap, but our parents were like, oh, be nice to your uncle, let's take a picture, go sit on his lap. How many kids are forced to sit on Santa Claus's lap? During Christmas time, they're screaming bloody murder, and it's a funny picture, and they take the pictures and they share it around. That causes it imprints on you, whether you remember it or not. And part of, I think, coming back to that place of neutrality to kind of reset yourself is to be able to kind of unlearn those habits and observe them and work through them, because the body is the minefield. The body is not going to release the information until you allow it to release that information.
Another thing that can happen too when you go through trauma is at a metaphysical, spiritual level, your soul actually fragments, it separates, it goes off into the cosmos. And then, so I have this wonderful technique called aspects, where you call in all aspects of your soul wounding and trauma, which represent as, self-judgment, anger, fear, blame, guilt, all those sorts of things. And you send that love and forgiveness, and then you call them forward and reunite them in your heart chakra. And then you're sort of unifying all aspects of your soul, which have, broken off in times of trauma or, damage.
Awesome.
Do you think, I think we've all spoken about this in our various different discussions before, but the reactions that we're seeing at the moment seem to be getting more extreme. The divide between, people that might be watching this discussion and other people that are completely in a fear mode, particularly with the new variants coming out and things like this. And what I am seeing in a lot of people that I'm interacting with is this freeze response, where it's almost too overwhelming for them to now choose a different path. How much are you guys seeing of that in, the people that you're interacting with? Because we had one announcement last week in the UK and suddenly everyone's got these on again. It's quite incredible. Anyone can jump in there, whoever wants to. Free for all.
Ladies first.
Well, the original people is really what I'm concerned, particularly with in Australia at the moment. And so there's a lot of reaction going on to that at the moment in Australia, So I'm seeing that people, in terms of that freeze response, they're wanting to help and they're wanting to respond and do whatever they can. But it's like that freeze response, because you don't know what to do. People don't know how to respond, how to react. How to step in and change what's happening. And we can see this eradication planned of these beautiful original pure DNA lineage beings that are holding secrets for all humanity that are absolutely essential for us to hold on the planet, and we can see this intended decimation of that. So that to me, I think I'm seeing that freeze response, and people out there, they're in shock, and they want to support and help in whatever way they can, but they don't know what the next step is and what to do to go forward. Yeah.
Do you think if we were more in our heart space, we'd have that freeze response so much?
No.
I'm thinking, as a mother, I don't, if I see my child in danger, there's no engaging brain. It's just pure reaction. And by that, it doesn't matter whether it's a 2-legged child or a 4-legged child. And I think, again, I think for me, it comes back to what we were talking about at the start, whereas humans, we've been so programmed to be so in our head that we're overthinking things, because what you were just discussing, Medyhne, is so horrific what we're seeing. And when you can, see what's happening to people, and I'm wondering, what is it that causes this freeze response? Because if so many people just did jump in instinctively to action, it could be stopped so quickly, couldn't it?
Absolutely. JC, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm just listening to all of this, and it comes to my mind that humanity has been traumatized to no end in the last 2 years, more so than maybe ever. Like, if you think about all the wars in history, none of them have reached the human psyche like what's reaching the human psyche now. And I think we have yet to understand how damaging this is to our children. And perhaps that's for another roundtable. We could do a whole roundtable on that. But because of that trauma, and also because of the fast pace of change that's occurring, I think those two things at the same time is what's causing this freeze motion that you just described. We're just not equipped for it. When you think about it, just 50 years ago, your grandparents can go 70 years and maybe stay in the same job their whole lifetime, or they could have that same social construct for the whole lifetime. Now, in these last 2 years, we've been asked to review everything we know about everything, and we're realizing that for the most part, we were lied about everything. So we're trying to reconstruct our reality at the same time as it's being dismantled in front of us. So I think that's the big challenge for a lot of people watching the show. They're like, oh my God, that's no longer true. And they're putting their mind to try to figure out what truth is, or what their reality is. And as they're putting that into their mind, they go into this kind of feedback loop of trying to fix that because it's crumbling before them. And they're not realizing that they're caught in this loop here of having to understand and mourn the loss of the old systems, while at the same time being challenged to bring the new one in. I think that's why, I think we talked about this maybe 4 episodes ago, Catherine. We said that we were suffering this fatigue of trying to figure out what our reality was. We were never challenged like this before. If I asked my parents and they asked their parents, they would always be met with the same response. Oh, this is how it is, and stop asking questions. It's always been this way, right? Whether that was school, religion, or politics, it's always been this way. That no longer holds true. And so for people living that now, and for humanity to live that now collectively all at the same time, it's creating this huge, maybe magnification of what perhaps the real problems are on the planet. And so this is why we're seeing this freeze effect on everyone. But I agree with you, Catherine. If you are in the heart space, you are in a much better position to navigate that than if you are in any other space. And Medyhne just mentioned again, go back to the heart chakra. That's where the 0 point energy is. And this is where you can hold all of these fluctuating fields in one place, and to find your center. If you're not there, you cannot hold your center. I guess that's the best way I can describe it.
Very true. And inherently, I think people are good. They're benevolent, and they're not used to seeing all this darkness and all this sort of deep, nefarious, malevolent behavior. And they're thinking, oh my God, how do I deal with that? It's like, because the majority of people, they don't think that way. It's not in their consciousness, and they're not used to navigating that sort of information, because most people are kind, and they want to help one another, and they want to do good things for the world. So I think just the shock of seeing this level of depth
Depravity.
of darkness and everything yeah, I think that's a challenge as well for people.
Right, so I'd be interested in your thing, because when I was hearing you saying that, Jean-Claude, it's interesting because I can remember some really powerful conversations with my grandmother, who was having my mother during the Second World War, living in London where they were being bombed every day and members of her family had already been killed and the rest of them were off fighting. And what came to me was the fact that, you know, we would have conversations as saying that all of us here, we've grown up in a generation where we haven't faced that. And pretty much most of us on the screen, yes, of course, we've all had various challenges in our lives, but from a survival point of view of having food, water, shelter, and not having someone obviously coming to kill us, we've had a lot of time on our hands to think about these things. Whilst, say, my grandparents' generation, who had my parents during the war, both of my parents were born in London, like they literally didn't have time to think about things like this. It was pure survival mode. You know, were they going to have enough food? Were they going to have somewhere to shelter? And I think this sort of affluent society that a lot of us, not all of us, are in, but when we're not seeing these dilemmas in the tribes of various places across the world where people are living more in tune with nature. I'm just wondering how much of it is the way that we've been living in modern lives, and how much that adds to the complexities of the situation we're in, because when a lot of the time in our day-to-day life, we're not worried about our survival needs.
Well, I think that's where I was getting at in terms of understanding our reality. You just mentioned the tribes who live in harmony with nature. They're living in the woo, so to speak, because they're living with the waves of nature. Absolutely. We do not. So we don't understand, for the most part, I think we don't understand that we live, how do I say it? The nature of our reality is transitory. We've been made to believe that's in this box, and we've been put in all these smaller and smaller boxes throughout this matrix of control. But as soon as we step out of that box, we realize there is no box, right? So if you're living in harmony with the universe, whenever universe throws at you, you can understand and you can ride the wave of that change, because you are part of that woo, if you want to call it, this transitory nature of reality. This is why people are emailing you, Catherine, and saying, hey, I can't understand because this person says the contrary to that person. Okay, again, they're trying to deal with the fact that there's no more box and that these boxes are disappearing, and it's up to them to hold all of these frequency field. So the same thing with our opinions. You said something in a show, maybe 3 shows ago, Catherine, that you used to care what people thought about your opinions, and now you don't so much anymore. And I've went through that same process too, of when I woke up and I was trying to wake up people, and people didn't understand and they weren't really paying attention to what I was saying, and I couldn't understand it. And I thought it was an attack upon me and my opinions, because I was my opinions at that point, not realizing that so too was the nature of the reality transitory, so too were my opinions, because I lived in this transitory nature of reality. I think this is what's really, if you look at it, yes, there's all these trials and travails that humans go through, you know, lack of food, war, and all these things, but higher level than that, it's whether or not you're living in, I guess, balance with universe, or in the woo, as opposed to in the boxes that these matrix of control have put you in. And this is what we're living now. We're living a breakthrough of all of these boxes, and it's very unfamiliar and uncomfortable for most humans. We've never been on that. We've relied on these boxes. And when you see the anger directed at you, Catherine, and at myself through emails, because people don't understand the dichotomy of some of the viewpoints that are being shared, is because they're in fear, or they're reacting, like Brice said, from old past traumas of this matrix program, to the fact that they no longer have something solid to stand on. Yeah. And I think, again, here, this is where all of us in the shows that we're doing can provide not only a level of understanding for the audience, but compassion for them as well. And to mirror that back to them, and to show that, hey, we're all in this together. We're all trying to figure out what was done to us, but where, more importantly, where we're going with all of this. I think this is where the conversation ultimately needs to happen. And I know you guys have all done a good job about Yes, we can talk about Mr. T and Mr. B, until we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, it's all about us being responsible for ourselves in this trajectory and this evolutions that humans are on. And I think it's so exciting. It's scary because we've relied on these boxes for so long, thinking that that was reality. Now we really have to make it our own. And I think for a lot of us, that's where some of that fear is coming from. And I hope that having these conversations can really help the audience.
I think healing the division, you made a great point in, because we're all wondering how to heal this division that's happening everywhere we see in the world. And so making a distinction between when you have a different opinion with someone else, it doesn't mean you have to hate them and go into that emotional reaction. You stay centered in your heart and you have a different opinion. And I think that's where people are going wrong, because they're thinking that if someone has a different opinion to them, they all of a sudden have to dislike them. And that's not what it's about. We stay centered in our heart space, and then we can honor one another's differences. And that's the mark of a civilized society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Oh, go ahead, Brice, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because I said it before we started filming, my favorite quote is Aristotle, it's a sign of an intelligent mind when you can entertain an idea without accepting it. And we have gotten to this place. It's funny, I have two aunts, my mom's sisters, that they were both Republicans. They married Democrats. It was never a big deal. It was they just always joked about it around election time, but their marriages only ended when one of them passed away. And so they had these very successful long-term marriages, but now things have become so polarized that it's like everyone has to walk on eggshells with each other. And I don't have one friend that shares the exact same opinions with me on anything. And it doesn't matter to me because I still love them. Like and opinions are, well, they say opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one anyway. So it's not even make or break, but yeah, no. And we're talking about the nature and the soul. So it's like, it goes into like the three big rules. And I hate to keep bringing it back to yoga, but that's where I come from. And understanding this is, we have Prakriti, Purusha, and Ishvara, and Prakriti is nature. Nature is anything that has a birth, a life, and a death. And because it has that cycle, it is always changing. And Purusha is like Atman. It's deeper than the soul. It's the eternal part of you that's just always existed. And that Purusha is what connects to Ishvara. So Ishvara, God, source, universe, creator, whatever you want to call that ultimate cosmic energy. And so even in these 5,000-year-old sutras, Patanjali is saying like man's suffering comes because you are confused by who you really are. You think you are nature. You think you are who you are in this body, but this body that you are in is only temporary. And so when it starts to change, when things start to come out of it's like everything in your life is trying to hold sand in your hands. It's just going to slip through your fingers. Relationships change, your job changes, your body changes. And most of this stuff is completely out of your control, even if you're under the delusion that you think it's in your control. And as we were saying before we started filming, part of these practices are to be able to see the truth through that illusion. So on like a grander scale, that's understanding that you are an energy source that is never ending. And that energy source is merely here just observing everything happening around you and learning from that, because once this body goes back into the earth, that energy source will move on. And that energy source is what is connected to Ishvara, not the Prakriti, not the nature. Even though the nature is a Shakti, is an expression of the energy source, it is that pure energy, that pure soul, Atman, Brahman, that pure essence of you that goes back to source. And so that's part of the practice, is being able to, those attachments again, always come back. They always come back to that matrix, that illusion of your nature. You never have like delusional attachments to what your soul is. Like that stays consistent. It's always about these, like, you can call the ego, whatever you want to call it. These things are just that are based in mortality anyway. So yeah.
I love that. I love what we're talking about here. It's so cool. It's like, your soul is incredible. It's so intelligent that it will create for itself the greatest area where you are in illusion, and it will bring that illusion to you, and then it will show you what that illusion is, and it will ask you to transmute being stuck within that illusion. So it's like we have this amazing higher consciousness that the areas where we most need to learn learn and to rise above the illusion will come to us. It's like there was this man I heard of who he was very attached to material things, and he was a hoarder, and he was collecting all this stuff, and his house was just packed with things, and he was, that was his world. That was everything that was important to him. One day, this huge fire happened, and everything was burnt and burnt to the ground. There was just razed to the ground. And so within that context, he had to learn immediately to release attachment to material possessions, because that was his illusion. That was the thing that he was most attached to. And so we see that in our own lives. So whatever we most need to learn will come to us at the moment. And in the moment, it's coming in spades, because our soul growth is so accelerated, and it's like in 1 week, it's like having 3 months all, condensed into 1 week now, because time is speeding up. And so all this learning that we need to do of meeting our shadow self and meeting our wounding and meeting all the illusion that we have been living in is coming to the fore. And that's why people are, having such difficulty as well. But, remembering that our souls chose to experience this so that we could go into ascension, and so we could accelerate our growth, and we're not victims. We chose for this to happen, and to be able to recognize as much as we can when these lessons are coming to us, and be able to understand the meaning behind them, and why these lessons are coming, and what is the learning or the lesson within that for us that we need to learn. How can we learn that? How can we transmute it? And how can we get to the next level?
That's really good. One of the things I often say on my show is, universe is not doing this to you, it's doing this for you. So that's number one. And two, universe doesn't care how long it takes you to learn your lesson. If it takes you 5 minutes, universe will say, okay, so be it, and it moves to the next thing. If it takes you 5,000 lifetime, universe will say, okay, so be it, I will keep presenting these opportunities for you to learn. So it doesn't really care. It's really up to you. So I think for a lot of people, grasping that in the situation they're in really can help them step them back and go into that 0 point, understanding that, oh, okay, I asked for this in a way. And I'm not being facetious, because a lot of people will say, oh, come on, JC, I didn't ask to get raped, or I didn't get asked to be in it. Well, in a way, you have to really pay attention to the bigger scheme of things. So thank you, Medyhne. I really appreciate that. Janine and I are trying to produce this show. For the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the idea. It came to me in a show about sabotage via hijacking. We talked about earlier how there's a matrix of control, and it's very adept of being in control. It's been in control for a long time. And so it has all these boxes, but on top of all these boxes, it has this mechanism of sabotaging and seeing in the future the degrading of these boxes. Let me explain. As this energy of the divine feminine is rising on the planet, the matrix kind of foresaw that. And what did it do? It brought up this idea of ISIS, the really bad, scary people, right? So it usurped the word ISIS, the divine feminine, and brought it to a negative connotation. So as humans were plugging into the fields of the divine feminine frequency, we were brought with, oh, the terror, ugly people, and the nasty, scary things that they do on airplanes and all of these things, right? So there's that sabotaging there that's in place. Another one is about all this transgender agenda. Again, as humans are getting closer and closer to understanding the field of sacred union, we're now being confused with the transgender agenda, again, as a hijacking of that energy. The matrix is doing that all the time. And what you guys were all talking about earlier, about being able to entertain thoughts, not necessarily attach yourself to them, or not also labeling other people's for their opinion. This is another form of sabotage that has been so far very effective. And I'm hoping that for us putting our finger on it for the audience, they can step back and see the bigger picture. For example, when Obama was in power, he talked about this Obamacare thing. And I was a policy wonk way back when. So I would read the documents and I'd say, actually, no, you can't keep your doctor if you want to keep your doctor. That's not true, Mr. Obama. I was reading from the policy work, and people would say, well, Jean-Claude, you're a racist. No, I'm just reading the policy work. But suddenly this idea of entertaining ideas became labeled as terrorist, as a socialist, as a whatever, racist. So this whole idea of labeling right now, for example, when people are emailing Janine and myself, hey, so-and-so said that, she or he might be dark, whatever. Yeah. Watch my words here. We don't want to get deleted off YouTube, but they're associated with the dark people. Well, yes, in some cases that could and may in fact be true, but in some other cases it might not. And even if it does it really matter? The whole point of that conversation was to get to your enlightenment. Universe is providing you with the opportunity you requested in order to learn this. So by putting labels on the people who brought you this information, it's really beside the point. that's not,
It's
that's
that
not where
saying, don't,
universe is trying to get to you. Go ahead.
yes, yes, it's that saying, JC, don't shoot the messenger.
That too.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
what it means.
Can I just ask you all, based on all that you've just said, do you think, and now when I'm saying we as humans, obviously it's a complete generalization, but do you think that we're really overcomplicating things here? We have a saying in the UK, which is stop examining your navel. And what that really means is stop looking down all the time, stop looking down, start looking up again, stop worrying about what's in there, what has been, and focus your attention on what could be. And whereas I understand that knowledge is really important to understand people's motives and things, you know, the good old song, just say no. Do you think we're spending so much time contemplating these things as various different communities that that's almost taking our eye off the ball about just getting on and doing it?
Yes. Short answer for me is yes. And this is why in different shows we're saying hey, we need to elevate the conversation. Because again, if we're talking about Mr. B, Mr. T, en français, in French, we'll say on s'enfarge dans les fleurs du tapis. We are tripping in the flower work in the carpet. So they're not actually there. It's like little things, right? And so, yes, I agree. That's where we are. And we have to elevate that conversation. We have to remove ourselves from all that little detail. Because again, that's where they want us, in the complication and the detail and the labeling of each other and the division. And again, that's not served us very well in the past. We need to move out of that. How and when? Hopefully these conversations help. Hopefully being compassionate for the people who are going through this awakening process too, because you have to remember, for most people, well, maybe for the people here on the screen, we've been awake for some time. We've had so many years to swallow those difficult pills, those rude awakenings. But there are people coming just online now, they have to swallow so much, like much more in so little time, right? So yes, I think we're complicating things a lot. And I think it's just about stepping back, maybe I dare I say it, being more of a recluse. And for some reason, the universe is also providing these opportunities. Janine did a video this weekend too about how universe provided her with not being invited to the party, so to speak. So maybe there's part of that going on too. And universe is wiser than we know.
It's like simplifying everything, simplifying life, you know, bringing it back to the core of what really counts and what really matters. You know, there's all, for example, this information out there, which some people call like a slipstream, which is all the, you know, the truther information, and you can dig deep into the rabbit hole and go forever within that. But, you know, does that really serve your highest good at this time? It's good to be aware of information, but how deep do you go? You know, there is a level to that which just complicates and really, I think when you're dealing with challenges, being able to bring things back to the core, the basics, you know, to simplify, you know, do we have a garden where we can feed ourselves, you know, and be self-sufficient and eat vegetables and grow vegetables, you know, that those basic core things that are truly what matters and truly important, and anything that brings you also into the present moment, as opposed to being in the past or the future, can help as well.
We have a saying in yoga that goes, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, but when the student is really ready, the teacher disappears. And if you look at like what we've seen as far as like the movie with Mr. T and Mr. B, they opened up an avenue of understanding for us to see what has been happening. But then they have to step back and allow us to then, again, as you say, don't go too far, to be able to sit within yourself. And what is it? I know, Catherine, we've talked about this before, like at this moment, doesn't matter about Mr. T or Mr. B. It's all about your sovereignty. And it's all about, that's the whole great awakening. It's not about just the crumbling of the matrix. I mean, yes, it has to crumble because we're moving from 3D to 4D, and 3D is polarity, 4D who the hell knows what that is? We'll see when we get there. But it's about you. It's about you understanding like who you are, that you are not this thing that you thought you were in the age of Pisces. And our teachers have now disappeared. I mean, and you see people panicking because they want this shift to happen. They want these things to happen, but it's almost like the more we want and we want, the more it's going to get pushed back, because we have to learn who we are. And that's something we actually, I think we all know who we are. We just have to remember again. And that the teacher can't be there for that. You know, that's part of pratyahara. That's the self-study. No one can do that for you. No one's going to come and give you a life vest for you. You have no choice but to do that yourself. And it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. The quickest path to get there is to be still and to be silent and just maybe sit in nature and just cut off all external noise and go within. That's the quickest path.
Absolutely.
There's also another path.
Oh, yes.
I thought when we started this show, we were all going to share about our personal orgasms. And of course, I'm joking, but actually I'm not, because there was this book way back when called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, right? So going into that moment, that present moment, being present. For some people, of course, the orgasm is the ultimate way of being present. It opens up that gate between heaven and earth, as the Taoists say. But Catherine, let's talk about your orgasms.
Well, I haven't had time for many recently. No, I don't.
Just so you know, guys, they dared me to say that before we started the show.
So I'll go off now then. No, but you know, you've got to bring some humor into it, and you've got to really, we did need to get the orgasm thing in there somewhere. That's why JC's looking so tired, because he's just been away for the weekend.
You
know, you guys know she dared me to say that before the show, just so you know.
I did, because
I think it's a great point. You know, the sexuality is such a great avenue to accessing our highest potential and our highest spiritual potential, and that's why there's been so much, horrible, sort of decimation of what sexuality is, because that is such a key part to humanity's evolution. And it's a great point. I think that's really good to.
That's definitely.
I did this series last year.
Table.
Oh, go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's definitely one that we need more discussion for on the next round table.
Yeah, it deserves a full 2 hours in and of itself. I did a series last year or 2 years ago on my first
boasting now,
channel.
Girls.
What's that?
I said you're boasting now. Whole 2 hours.
At any rate, this old series I did was called the Kundalini Secrets Revealed on YouTube, and it got deleted by YouTube. But one of my guest speakers said something to the effect that for humans to really become free, one of the last gates is understanding and empowering ourselves with our Kundalini energy, whether that's chi, prana, whatever you want to call it, whatever denomination you study. It's all about energy. And so, yes, the orgasm is part of that, not for the sake of the orgasm, but for the sake of understanding how to cultivate that energy and then how to manifest with that energy. Suddenly, everything changes. And this is what Medyhne was just alluding to. So much was put upon us in terms of trauma and distortions with this information that we have no choice right now but to be kind of slaves to all of these programs, and we're creating with this polluted energy. So not that we have no choice, but I have compassion for all of us for being in this position, because a lot of energy was placed exactly on this particular topic so that we can't go through this last gate. But it's probably, if not the most important one, if you listen to some of the speakers who were on that series 2 years ago. So yeah, absolutely. I'm up for that conversation if you want to host it again, Catherine.
I will. I've got so many jokes on this one, and I think Anthony Fauci probably could be within this conversation, because I don't think he's had an orgasm for a long while. Well, I was going to ask something else really serious, but it doesn't seem appropriate now. So I have loved this conversation. I think we've got to do this again, guys. But Medyhne, you promised, before we go on to Medyhne, you said that you would be able to close us out with some really powerful little exercise for people to do. But before we do that, Brice, is there anything else that you would like to say, get across before we finish this conversation tonight?
Well, I was just thinking about what you're talking about, that how women especially, and we're coming into the divine feminine, but when you talk about sexuality, I was like, oh shit, my parents are gonna be watching this. Like,
Yes.
I was like, so like as a girl from the South. But when, you know, and I started thinking too about even the, you know, the women have been so just stripped of everything, of their own autonomy. And even in like Ayurvedic study, like even a woman's cycle, for women, we are on a moon cycle. That's and men are on a solar, a pranic cycle. We're on an aponic cycle. And in Ayurvedic medicine, they try to get women on to have their cycle on the new moon and not the full moon. And I'm sorry, TMI, but I'm on the full moon. And I was always like, why do I have to be on the new moon? Well, I started researching that. And women who are on the new moon tend to be more demure. They tend to be more passive. They tend to have a lot of babies. They're just that, but women on the full moon, they're light workers. They're, maybe could be classified as witches, if you want to call them that. I've been called that. Sure, I'll wear that label. And they used to burn them at the stake if they bled on the full moon. I mean, so you have this, like, even within our freaking cycle, they've tried to like take power away from us. Oh yeah, they'll give you like herbs and stuff to get you to shift your cycle. So they're trying to use nature to remove you from your natural rhythm of nature as a woman. And when I started researching that, it kind of pissed me off a little bit. And now I wear that label with pride. I'm a full mooner. Like, come at me. Like,
me too.
You know? So you probably are too, Medyhne. So you know, and it's just like they never talk about men have a cycle every 3 months. That's the pranic cycle. That's the solar cycle. So every 3 months, men get their like man period. That's why men get kind of bitchy every 3 months. That's it. You know, so they never talk about that. It's always women. It's always like, so anyway, that's what I was just thinking about when you guys were talking about that. I was like, these sons of bitches, they've just really, and especially being from the South, like that is a big thing in the South for women. Like you know, still magnolias all the way. That's how I grew up. You know, you don't talk about that. You don't.
No. Well, you certainly don't in England. Oh my God, you certainly don't. I grew up, you weren't even allowed to mention the word period. You know, you just couldn't do it. And in England, we don't talk about things like that.
And here I was talking about this on YouTube for everyone, and of course
you're
my
French.
YouTube channel got deleted.
You're French.
Funny. Like, it wasn't.
Yeah.
We were accused of like pornography and all these things. Like, we're having a conversation, but it was like the attacks on those shows were so outrageous. And I realized, and my guests realized, these are bots. This is the system really wanting to clamp down on that conversation, because that's the conversation that cannot happen in order for it to keep control. And that's the main point again. It is controlling and creating this prison matrix and these boxes with our energy. So the moment we decide this far no further, not only are we not giving it our energy anymore, we stop the bleeding, so to speak. That's the end of it for them. But can you imagine going even one step further and now saying, not only am I not giving you my energy anymore to create the prison of my own demise, now I'm going to use my energy for my own creation, for what I really want, for what my soul contract is really here for. So if you're asking me for my last words of wisdom, that's what it would be. So again, a lot of people have given me flack for talking about these subjects, but I'm like, it's really important. And it's not, again, I won't get into the negativity of it. I just want to say, be open-minded and think about these things, because there's a reason why you are being triggered. Not you guys here, but some people maybe in the audience who will be given this video by somebody else. They might be triggered by that conversation, just as you might be if you live in certain Bible belts in the South or whatever. But you should ask yourself why you're being triggered. Where does that program come from? And does that program still serve you today? And if not, then you have steps to take. You have self-responsibility and actions to take for yourself. That's my big message to all of you watching the show. Be responsible for self, become a master of self, and go through that Torii gate from the mundane to the spiritual, or from the mundane to the absolutely sacred. That is our nature of who we are. It's just been hidden from us. And that's that symbol, the Torii gate. We must walk through that Torii gate to get to the other side.
So before we finish off with you, Medyhne, my words of wisdom are never move a sleeping cat. Because Mine's behind me, and if you could see him, it is a picture of perfection. I tell you, it's too dark. So Medyhne, would you be kind enough to lead us out with one of your lovely, lovely exercises?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think this is a really good one to be able to practice at the minute, and it's called meeting your inner advisor. So what I like to encourage people to start is, set up your own personal spiritual space, call in, your highest guides and teachers of love and light, perhaps the ascended masters that you resonate with, and set up the space in a beautiful way, and then go inward. And I like to always start with centering myself in the heart center. So seeing, for example, a flame of divine unconditional love in your heart space, connecting to that divine unconditional love, and then expanding that around you. And a beautiful thing that you can also do is to expand this right around where you're living, extend it right around your country, extend it right around the planet, and then extend that unconditional divine love right out into the cosmos, as far as you want it to go, infinitely far if you choose. And then when you're able to go to the next step, so just take a few minutes to do that. And breathing deeply, always connecting with the breath through these processes. As I'm sure Brice would encourage with the practice of yoga, the breath is so important. And then going into your favorite place in nature, or your favorite quiet place where it's serene and calm, and just centering your energy there, so you're still in your divine unconditional love and you're centered in your beautiful quiet space. Maybe just having a look around, examining it, how it looks, how it sounds, how it feels, all allowing you to come fully centered in the present moment of what you're doing. And remembering that you can access this beautiful quiet space at any moment, anytime you need it. And it impacts you on all aspects of your being, even at a physical level. Your whole being would change when you just imagine yourself there in that beautiful space. And from that space, I'd like you to invite your inner advisor to come forward and present themselves in front of you. So allow an image to form to represent your inner advisor. And the inner advisor is a wise, kind, and compassionate being that can take any form it chooses. It may be an image, it may be a feeling, or simply a sense or impression. Allow it to come forward now. And as it does, allow yourself to examine it closely. What is it? What form does it take? Perhaps it is a light or a color. Let yourself examine it fully. And if you need to, ask it to come closer so you can get a fuller sense of it. And you may have an issue that you'd like to ask it about at the moment. So as it's presenting itself to you, ask it if there's anything that it would like to share with you, or you may have something you'd like to ask it about, something in your life that you want clarity about. Just have a dialogue with this inner advisor and see what it would like to share with you. If there's anything that you're unclear about, just ask it for clarity. Perhaps you can also change your perspective and see yourself from this advisor's perspective. So you stand in its shoes and look at yourself and see how you present through the eyes of this image. Ask if there's anything else you need to know or understand right now. Ask your inner advisor if it would like to connect with you again soon. Perhaps make a commitment with it to reconnect whenever is needed. Thank your inner advisor. And if you choose to reconnect again soon, make that promise. Say your goodbyes and return to your quiet place. Take the time that you need to integrate this. And I'd like to finish with a Sufi blessing. That's very beautiful. May the blessings of love be upon you. May the blessings of love be upon you. May its peace abide within you. May its essence illuminate your heart, now and forevermore, from a Sufi blessing of love and peace. Thank you to spiritual team. Thank the divine. Love and blessings to everyone out there. Thank you.
That was absolutely lovely. Thank you so much, Medyhne, and thank you so much for Brice and JC for a really lovely conversation tonight. I hope anyone who watches this back enjoys it as much as we did, and we shall meet again soon.
Beautiful.
Merci. Au
Thanks.
revoir.
Bye all.